Okay, welcome to Coronavirus Biology. I'm Chrissy Spencer. I'm one of the two instructors. I'm a faculty member in biological sciences. My background is in evolutionary biology and evolutionary genetics. So I've learned a lot about SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus that is infecting us and spreading around the world to generate the disease called COVID-19. And I'm hoping that you guys will come learn that alongside me and Dr. Levy.
Oh, yes, and hi, I'm Dr. Levy. I'm also a faculty member in biological sciences and work for the College of Sciences. I'm an immunologist by training, although I don't do a lot of immunology work now. And it has been, both, as for everyone, both frightening and interesting to see the way a brand new pathogen is affecting the world at large. And so I've certainly spent a lot of time this summer doing a deep dive into the science behind the virus and trying to learn as much as I possibly can about the research that's going on, but also, reflecting a lot on how it's affecting people and people's lives. So I really thank you for taking the time to be here. Just so you know, we did a sort of quick scan of who is registered for this course, and while our original intention for this course was for it to be kind of a non-majors, no prerequisite course that all majors would take, as it turns out, most of the people in this class are STEM majors. So that's a little different and a little interesting. I don't think it's going to dramatically affect the way that we teach the course, but it might we might take a few liberties with that knowledge as we move forward.
But we might also ask you, drop ad ends at 4 p.m. today, and so maybe get in touch with a non-science major friend and recruit them to come join the class before 4. That would be awesome.
All right, so our topic for today, we're going to jump right in and start talking about how we know and understand what we do about this brand new virus and this brand new disease. All of this has moved very, very fast, and it's caused a lot of people to sort of think about the origins of knowledge, scientific discovery process, and with a lot of conflicting information that has come out at different points during this pandemic, it's been a kind of frustrating and frankly scary to think about what's been going on with the virus. I know that when school shut down in March, I found myself having a lot of anxiety, and I actually found myself soothed by going into the scientific literature and reading about what we actually know. And so that was part of the motivation for starting this course. As we delve in here, there were just a few terms that I wanted to make sure that you knew and understood. I'm sure many of you already know this, but the term coronavirus relates to a large family of viruses. There are many coronaviruses. So we're using the term almost exclusively now in general conversation. When we say coronavirus, we're talking about the novel coronavirus, our newest, the most recently discovered coronavirus, and its technical name is SARS-CoV-2. So the original SARS coronavirus, of course, had its first outbreak in the early 2000s. Its effects were limited primarily to Asia, but SARS-CoV-2 was the official scientific name that was given for the novel coronavirus that emerged in 2019. You can, when you search the scientific literature, this is the term to use. COVID-19 relates to the disease itself, so the manifestation of SARS-CoV-2 infection. That's called COVID-19. Convalescent is a term for recovered. Seropositive is a word that means having antibodies to the virus. So someone seroconverts when they go from not having antibodies to having antibodies. They're seropositive if they have antibodies, and a serology test is a test for antibodies. So this is a measure of your immune response to the virus. Someone who is seropositive or who has antibodies can be recovered from the virus, or they can still be infectious. And then we had a question in the chat earlier about the kind of surveillance testing that's going on. Most of the viral testing that's happening now is for viral nucleotides, for viral RNA, and that is a PCR-based test where you get the swab up your nose, and then there's a test that's done to amplify the genetic material from the virus and determine what your viral load is. Okay, so we're not going to go deep into talking about the virus proper today, because what we're actually going to do is we're going to start thinking about evidence. And I'd like to start out here by having a discussion, having you participate in this process. What we're going to do is access this shared Google Doc to have this online discussion. You can find the link to this Google Doc in the module on Canvas. It's also right here. I know you can't copy and paste that super long thing from this slide, but hopefully Dr. Spencer can drop this in the chat from Canvas, or you can link to it from Canvas. And what I'd like for you to do, this prompt is also in the Google Doc, and I'm going to read it to you. One of your family members knows that you're taking this course. They tell you that they heard on Facebook that asymptomatic people were not infectious and wanted to know if this is true. So now I'd like for you to spend 5 minutes conducting online research on this topic and post your answer to this question, the question your family member asked you, in the Google Doc, along with links to your sources of information. And then we're going to come back and discuss. So for 5 minutes, do some online research on whether asymptomatic people are infectious, and post what you find in the Google Doc, and then we'll come back and discuss. I think we can go ahead and stop. So if you've been pasting things, that's fine. If you weren't able to get to it, that's fine too. I would encourage you to do this exercise a little later. But I think that it's pretty interesting if you take a look at what most people posted and where the information came from. It primarily came from government sites. Are you noticing the same thing, Dr. Spencer? Did you go to the doc? Oh, you might be muted.
I am sorry. I see a lot of CDC.
Uh-huh.
And I just saw a Nature article, WHO.
Mm-hmm. A few university websites, but primarily the CDC.
Something called firstpost.com.
Yep, I saw Stat News. So a few different types of sources of information. My guess would be that if you copy and paste this prompt into Google, this is probably the first few hits are what people are finding. And that is, I think, in general, the way people are approaching researching topics these days, right? If you want to know something, you go to a search engine and you drop your information in that you're curious about, and you read the top few hits and leave it at that, and trust Google to give you the best information. Another way people get their information is much like your family member got their information by letting it basically come to you through posts on social media, your feed on Twitter or Facebook. And sometimes people call this clickbait, right? This is people tend to click on things with sensational headlines that attract your attention. And they're written that way specifically because they're written to drive web traffic. Sometimes they're not even reputable news sources. They're just sort of aggregators that want you to go see their ads. Another source of information is the popular media. So, sites like television news or what was print media that's now all online, newspapers. These tend to be summaries of research written by journalists, and these are easy to understand. They're clearly written. They're written in a style that you don't have to have a degree in a STEM field to be able to read and understand. In the middle here, I should have left justified this a little bit, would be the informational websites like most of you found. Websites provided by government sources or universities or other places like that. At the bottom here, we see two other kinds of articles, which are a little harder to find, but are written by different kinds of people and serve different purposes. So one kind of article is called a review article, and this is an article that's written by an expert, usually by a scientist who's an expert in the field. It cites and summarizes research done by other people, or maybe even some research done by that particular researcher. Many review articles are what's known as peer-reviewed, which means that they had to be approved by both an editorial board and a group of reviewers who are also experts in the field before they are published. And they are really, really a great, thorough starting place if you are investigating a certain subject area. Now, they take some time to be written, so there are probably not a whole lot of review articles written to date on SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19, although there are plenty out there. But these because they're summaries of existing research, they usually take a little longer to be written. And then there is the primary literature. So published primary literature is usually also peer-reviewed, which means that it undergoes a review process by experts before it gets published. Lately, a lot of people have been reading primary literature even before it's been peer-reviewed or published, and that is in the form of preprints, which we will talk about later. As people are trying to learn as much as possible, as quickly as possible about this particular virus, there has really been an explosion in interest in the life sciences in pre-publications and that. Okay. So where do you find these research papers? Where do you find review articles in primary literature? Some of you probably found them on your Google search, but frequently you do not find them just when you use regular Google. There is another search engine that Google has that's called Google Scholar, and that is at scholar.google.com. And that includes both patents, preprints, and published articles, oftentimes ranked and rated in a similar way that Google does for other websites, which is how frequently they're visited, how frequently they're cited, and how relevant they are to your search and when they've been published. There are other databases like Web of Science and SciFinder. Depending on your field, you might be interested in using those. For our purposes, PubMed is a really reliable database. This is a database that's maintained by the National Library of Medicine, and includes some other sort of sub-databases like LitCovid, which is a great site for finding articles about COVID-19, and PubMed Central, which includes all of these articles that are available for free that aren't behind a paywall. Through the Georgia Tech Library, you should be able to access pretty much any journal article that you want to read. These articles are published by scientific journals that make their living through subscription services. But most medical articles are available at open access because, like the National Institutes of Health, actually require that published articles not be behind a paywall and be available for people to read and download. Is there anything you'd like to add, Dr. Spencer, on any of these?
No, as you were speaking, I just went through and added the direct links in the chat for most of these. Web of Science is one that you would have to go through the GT library and go to the databases to access. And SciFinder, I didn't do that one yet, so I don't know if that's one that's like that too.
That's another one. You can access all of these through the Georgia Tech Library website. Google Scholar, of course, is freely available. All right, so if you're curious about whether an article that you found is primary literature, whether it's a research paper or whether it's a review article, you can kind of usually get a good idea, especially with medically oriented publications, by the types of sections that you'll find in the paper. And you will utilize these different sections of a research paper for different reasons, depending on why you're wanting to read this particular article. Of course, the title is just the overall description. The abstract is a summary of findings. But sometimes you might want to read an article just because you want to know a little bit of background about a particular topic, and that is what you'll find in the introduction section. It's always just enough background that you need, enough background so that you can understand the study if you are fairly well versed in that subject area. It also has a lot of references to other papers that you might want to read. The materials and methods section is the section that talks about the protocols that they're using, where those protocols were published first, that's always cited in there, what kind of reagents are used in the experiments. As research on the coronavirus has been ongoing, this has been a very, very important thing for many researchers to look at as they're trying to replicate people's studies and build upon research methods that are very, very new and are being used. I actually spent some time this summer working up in a lab at the Center for Vaccines and Immunology at the University of Georgia, working on the serology test for SARS-CoV-2. And as we were setting up this particular assay, the actual source of many of the reagents that we used in the test were really critical when we used we just used a very simple blocking agent and had our assay fail. And when we purchased the same blocking agent from the same source that was used in the reference that had been published, we were able to replicate these people's results. And this was non-fat dry milk. This is not like a complicated reagent. This was a this was a very simple product. But materials and methods is really, really critical if you're trying to set up experiments and understand the types of experiments that are done.
Let me add one thing to materials and methods, which is just to think about it as a general methodology, because a lot of the research that's ongoing is actually mathematical research instead of bench work. So they aren't looking for protocols and reagents in their methodology, but rather explaining the assumptions and the mathematics that they use to frame their model. And that's really important to think about because their results totally depend on the assumptions they start with and their starting parameter values. So materials and methods, the methodologies, is an important part of a paper just to have a peek at, even if it's outside your wheelhouse, because it could help you really get a grasp on what general approach they were using to address the question.
Absolutely. The meat of the paper is in the results, which again, in a mathematical paper would have a different sort of look than it would in laboratory experiments. But in the results section, you will find more information about the experimental design in the figure legends of the presented data, and also a description of how the experiments were done and what the results looked like, usually with limited interpretation in the written sections of the results. And then every paper will have discussions and conclusions at the end and include a long list of references and citations for what they were referencing. So this is the basic anatomy of a research paper. You all will be digging into many research papers this semester. We have to because this is all so new and this is where we're finding this information. So I believe Dr. Spencer was also going to link in the module another website that will explain in more detail how to go about reading these different sections of a research paper if you're new to that.
Exactly. So it's already there. It's a PDF called Reading Strategy, Primary Research Article, and it just takes each of these sections and gives you a few guiding questions that you might ask yourself while reading a paper to really get deeper into each section, into the paper.
Okay, great. All right. So as we mentioned before, research in this area is really, really rapid. And I just wanted to show you, as you're trying to keep up with a particular subject area, you can set up alerts on many of these databases to send you information when new things are published. When it comes to COVID-19, you'll probably be bombarded if you try to sign up for any alerts for new research. I pulled this last night. It's probably changed already by today. Just in this year, There were over 67,000 results for research papers related to COVID-19, for publications related to COVID-19. So, so this is a really rapidly moving area. A few other things we wanted to point out from this slide are how these search results show up. So again, it's going to show up based on its relevance. It's going to show up based on timing, how recent these things are, and also going to show up based on how many citations an article has. The more citations it has, the more relevant Google thinks that it is going to be for you. So if we take a look at this, we'll see that there's an article at the top about closed environments. I actually really would like to read this. This is a preprint. The way we know this is that this is from a preprint archive called medRxiv, MEDRXIV, where preprints, these are where researchers can post their papers before they're published. So these researchers might have submitted this to a journal for publication already, but they're posting it here to sort of let everybody know they've already done this research and let people have access to their results. And this is an article called "Closed Environments Facilitate Secondary Transmission of Coronavirus Disease." So as we're moving into colder weather coming up, a lot of us are going to be spending more time inside. All of our outdoor social distancing ideas are probably going to be harder to accomplish, and the idea of being inside is going to be a lot more on people's minds. So this is a paper that I'm sure a lot of people will want to look at. It hasn't been cited very many times. I'm not sure why yet. It's probably brand new, which is why it's still in the medRxiv. But if you take a look down here at this third citation about cytokine storms that was published in the Lancet, you'll see that it's been cited already over 2,000 times, and it was published this year. So this particular paper was published in a very high impact journal. That's what you call particular places where people publish that people tend to read a lot and tend to cite the articles from that. So the Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine are the two top medical journals. Other really high impact journals are Science and Nature. And then, each subfield also has its high impact journals. Cell is a very high impact journal that a lot of publications related to the cell biology of this virus are being published in. You can see the next one down that's already been cited 643 times is from the New England Journal of Medicine. So, all right, and it is 1:12. I just have one more slide, so we can leave a little bit of time for questions here at the end. But the final slide that I wanted to show you for today relates to the topic that we had the discussion on earlier. So I asked you to think about asymptomatic spread and to do a little research on asymptomatic spread. Many of you found articles from the CDC and WHO and other websites. And when I looked, I found this article from the Washington Post on the left. So this is a newspaper, and there was an article that was published, I think it was less than 2 weeks ago. And the headline, which certainly makes me want to read this article, is that 40% of people with coronavirus infections have no symptoms. Might they be the key to ending the pandemic? So this is a little twist on the way most people think about asymptomatic cases, because people are worried that people will spread the disease if they have the disease and don't know it and aren't expressing symptoms. And the subtitle for this article is "New Research Suggests that Some of Us May Be Partially Protected Due to Past Encounters with the Common Cold Coronaviruses." So I read through this article. It was very well written. It had lots of interviews with researchers in it. It had a few citations to links to research articles. I had to do some digging before I found this new research that they reference in the subtitle. But once I found it, it was published in Science, and it was this article. And I just want to highlight the contrast between this easy to understand headline and very easy to read article from the Washington Post with the actual article that it was written about. So the article that it was written about is called Selective and Cross-Reactive SARS-CoV-2 T-cell epitopes in Unexposed Humans. And even the abstract, says many unknowns exist about human immune responses to SARS-CoV-2. They start talking about CD4 positive T cells and T cell memory. Then they talk about mapping T cell epitopes and talking about, affinity to cross-reactive T cells that have comparable affinity from common cold coronaviruses and SARS-CoV-2. And it is difficult to digest, I would say, for someone who doesn't have a background in immunology and maybe hasn't taken an immunology course. So to be able to translate that information from a primary research article into something that is going to be exciting and relevant to the general public is a challenge and important, because people are making their decisions about their health and their decisions about their behavior based on these kinds of things, based on the news articles that they're reading. So when you go out into the world after this and tell people that they probably are asymptomatic because they had a common cold coronavirus, we don't know that yet, right? This is all new, very new research, but you can go and read that original article and see whether that conclusion really matches with the data that you see in the primary research. And that's what we're hoping that you can do by the end of this. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing now and see.
Great.
Whether
Had a few questions in the chat. People asked great questions about why would you cite an article that's not yet been peer reviewed? If it's still in medRxiv or bioRxiv, why cite it? And my comment to that, guys, is that the demand for information is so high right now that this is very fast paced. If you wait for something to go through the peer review process of 6 months to a year sometimes, yeah, the train might have left the station on the next idea. So we're just trying to get things out so fast. But it is risky to cite something that's not officially vetted and published. Dr. Levy, Jacob has a question on how close was the Washington Post comprehension to the Science article. My guess is you haven't had a chance to fully read both of those articles yet to know the answer to that, since we prepared right before class for that slide.
That's true. I haven't thoroughly read it, but I think that it would be great for you to do this comparison. So I'll post the links for both of those articles in our module so you can take a look and see what you think. And we can certainly discuss that in our online discussion board over the course of the next week. If you all want to talk about whether you think the Washington Post article does a good job of describing the paper. I will say that in my initial reading of it, it seemed much more comprehensive. So the author of the news article had interviewed a lot of people. Those people had interpreted the article and had their own opinions about the impact of that research. So that the research was put into context not only by the author of the article, but also by a number of different researchers, both involved in the research itself and who are familiar with the research but didn't do that research. And so that really frames it and puts it in context. But whether the headline matches what's in the article, that's also another question. Yeah.
Clickbait.
Yes, exactly. All right. Any other questions? You can put them in the chat. I'm not seeing any more.
Nope. I think we're pretty set for right now.
All right. Excellent. So next week, we're going to talk about the pathophysiology of the disease. So that's our first topic, how this virus actually causes disease in people. So look out for readings and postings about that, and that will be our topic for next week.
The SAFE just posted one more question, which is any comments from us on the Russian vaccine that was just discussed in the news this past week? I don't have any comments yet.
No, I don't have any comments yet.
So things are moving very fast. You guys have probably read that vaccine development is on the order of years for most, years to decades, for many, many diseases. It's obviously too slow for this situation, and so everyone is moving fast. The fast movement in the US is still entirely following the guidance of vaccine development and testing. It's a 4-stage process. I have not looked to see how the vaccine in Russia was developed and if it followed those kind of standard practices.
The New York Times has a vaccine watch website that I would recommend checking out, that has a list of all of the vaccines that are in, what phase of clinical trials they are in, and what the kind of vaccine is. At the end of the semester, we will be talking more in depth about vaccines and how they're made, what the differences are between the different vaccines that are being developed, and then also therapies for the disease. We will scatter that information in throughout the semester, but we sort of left that to the end. Trying to pace this course is interesting because we will know much more by the end of the semester than we know now. So so we left that.
When we designed this course, I said, I want to start preparing now. And then we just looked at each other and said, across a video, and said, well, that's crazy, because it was May. And so much has changed even since May.
Yeah.
And we'll send out an announcement about what's coming down the pipe to you, and see you guys next week.
All right. Bye.
Bye.